Hello and greetings everyone, Darth Boreas here. Now today I want to talk about something that I kinda want to discuss a little bit because it's the limitations of force powers. Now I have played many RPG systems. I have been into RPG like tabletop RPG and video game and other RPGs for a bit over 30 years now, so quite a bit. I have experience as a dungeon master, running groups as a player. I have led several campaigns and lots of different systems as a player and as a dungeon master, or whatever you want to call that. Now, the thing is that magical systems per se are usually categorized in three different types. One is the basically magic can do whatever you wish category, which is pretty, let's say, not very helpful to determine what's actually possible, and it leads to a lot of writing issues because if you can't do just whatever, readers or players will have the question, why didn't villain or hero XY use that ability when he could have and should have, because it just opens up so many plot holes. So no restriction for magic systems is usually very, 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 very bad, because it just makes too much possible and really takes the tension out of stories and makes pretty much everything you do look stupid. The other version is where you have super extremely highly restrictive magic systems that have such a difficult time to being pulled off at all that magic is basically non-existent in your world, because it's basically you have a better solution for most situations without magic. And then there is the kind of in-between, which is obviously a huge spectrum, where magic can do super powerful things, but there's clear restrictions to when and how these can be achieved, and it's usually a one-off feat and clearly stated as such, or that there was a special alignment or something that explains why this power isn't used more often, or needs some super rare ingredients or whatnot. And common magic uses less hard, difficult to get ingredients and stuff like that. So this is a spectrum. Now Star Wars is more in the in-between. However, I have to say that Star Wars has various distinct magical systems. It has force powers, like the force push pull, what you know. It has Sith sorcery, which technically speaking is sorcery, because what the Night Sisters on Dathomir do is sorcery. It's not specifically Sith sorcery, it's their own branch of sorcery, but it is sorcery still. And then you have alchemy, also known as Sith alchemy, which deals with other things. Now the force seems to be a somewhat innate skill that you learn, basically like riding a bicycle. And then you have sorcery, which is more ritualistic, with certain gestures, ingredients, rituals that you got to do in order for it to work. And then you have alchemy, which is basically enchanting and alchemy and enhancing and changing creatures, which means that technically speaking, if you combine all of these in Star Wars, magic can do, technically speaking, anything you want it to. There is no power off limits. There were Sith that used Sith sorcery to explode suns and entire star systems alongside the sun going supernova. You have Sith eating entire planets' life force at once. You have Sith creating army of undead. You have Mother Talzin shape changing into all kinds of animals, flying, whatever. So sorcery is, technically speaking, whatever the writer wants it to be. There is no official limit to what sorcery can or cannot achieve. It's just basically whatever sounds cool and you think can work could be sorcery. The difficult part of that is that sorcery still requires materials, it still requires a ritual, and it still requires you the knowledge to do the proper ritual or to develop the ritual. So there is at least some work going in there. Now the difficult problem is that Darth Bane stated and proved that the effects of this sorcery aren't limited to Sith sorcery. Like the dark tentacles, the shadowy tentacles that Sana uses with Sith sorcery, Bane managed to summon with just his will, using only the Force, which gave Bane the proof of his idea that anything that can be done with Sith sorcery can actually be achieved with the Force as well. It's just more difficult to do so, but your will basically trumps anything. And he is very right about that, because if you go back in time and look at the Celestials or the Rakatan Empire, they did everything they did without Sith sorcery or any form of sorcery at all. They did it just with the Force, and they literally created planets and suns and star systems just using the Force. They moved black holes around the galaxy using just the Force, no sorcery required. Same goes for alchemy. Alchemy seems to be able to buff creatures and deform them and create magical potions and enchanted blades and whatnot. Yes, but so can the Force. The Rakatan Force Sabers weren't alchemically made blades, those were Force sabers with the Force. So it seems that in Star Wars the Force is unlimited power in many ways. Now there is some limitations. As example, Sith sorcery is explicitly said that you have to have a talent for it, or you will never be able to use it no matter how much you study it, which was the case with Darth Bane. He had no talent for it, his pupil did, so his pupil mastered Sith sorcery. Bane, as hard as he tried, just couldn't. Sith alchemy seems to be a thing that you can actually just study and do, like Palpatine did that. Many other Sith did that. You don't seem to have an inherent ability to use Sith alchemy. It seems to be a purely research-based kind of thing. And the Force itself, technically speaking, seems to be unlimited as well. But there are some limitations. The first limitation being that the Force is the Force powers are kinda distinct, that there are dark side powers, light side powers, neutral and or gray side powers. So if you are a dark sider, you will probably never use light side powers, and if you do, they will be much weaker, because you're not aligned to the living Force and thus the light side, making your, if you will, light side spells just way less potent, and you're better off not using them. Meanwhile, if you're a light side user like the Jedi, you technically speaking can use a dark Force, dark side powers like Force Lightning, which they called Force Judgment, but yours will just never be anywhere near as powerful as that of a dark sider. Meanwhile, if you're a gray user, you can use both without issues, but you will never master either of them, because you're not fully giving into one side or the other. So the limitation in Star Wars isn't necessarily that certain powers are completely unobtainable for non-aligned people. The problem is that if you're not aligned to it, you will just not get very far with it, even though if you have the basic understanding on how to do so. Now in canon there was this whole idea about midichlorians, which honestly most fans think is absolutely stupid and ridiculous, and I agree, because even the explanation what midichlorians are is just scientifically wrong, and if you try to make the Force a scientific thing instead of a mythological thing, you should stick to some science at least. As example, midichlorians are said to be living organisms within cells. Now the problem is that cells are already the smallest living organism that's possible, so something living inside of that, scientifically nonsense. Also now with the wills, there is now living beings inside the midichlorians, like it's just Inception basically, or what? Why do you need that? Also the midichlorian count opens up some problems, which I have gone through in a different video, but there seems to be the official problem that if you don't have the right midichlorian count, certain Force powers, or better said Force levels, will forever be beyond your grasp, and you will never get there because you don't have the raw potential to do those. Like if you are I don't know, a half a meter tall, you probably not become as strong as someone who is 2 meters tall, because there's just too much of an inherent genetic difference. So yeah, that's that. On the other hand, we have absolute clear proof in the lore that the midichlorian count apparently doesn't really mean anything, because we have few people who we actually know the midichlorian count, and of those we do know, we also know that the midichlorian count didn't seem to affect what they're capable of, because they pulled off things that they shouldn't, or in case of Anakin, he was unable to do certain things which he absolutely should have been able to because others could, and he has a higher midichlorian count. So even if you factor in the midichlorian count, apparently that's not really the important part of it. Also, we see ancient Sith whose count we simply don't know, but I doubt they all had a higher count than Anakin, and yet they had powers way beyond anything that Anakin or Vader could do. We also see that Vader was actually weakened when he was injured. I mean, that's what's happening, but his midichlorian count per cell stayed the exact same. Yet he was weaker somehow. The other problem that you run into with the midichlorians is that if it's the total count, some species that are small in stature would have way less than species that are larger, which is pretty much the opposite of what we see. If it's the count per cell, then cyborgs and cybernetic creatures should have the exact same force capabilities and powers as everyone else, because their count per cell in the living tissue that they still have would be the same, but somehow that's not true. So I think that's just a big contradiction, and was indeed one of George's biggest blunders. Now, with that out of the way, what seems to be a factor is indeed your connection to the side that you're using. We know that the Celestials, as example, were so powerful that one of them created the dark side. So the Celestials existed before the Force itself existed. They did their things somehow with different abilities, and that's also canon, that we can see that the Force isn't the only cosmic power that people can access to do stuff with. There's others, though I don't know if anything but the Celestials ever used or had access to that. It's just that there used to be something else. Now in Star Wars it's all about the Force, and the Force seems to be rather unlimited. If you look at the Rakatan Empire, they powered all of their technology with the Force. Basically unlimited power. Starforge and stuff like that was built by the Rakatans. So you can combine the Force with technology. Okay, fine. You have people that are super strong gray Force users. You have people that are very strong Darksiders, people who are very strong Lightsiders. And it doesn't seem that these peoples have an inherent boost in anything. It's really just that, like biologically speaking, because later pure Sith that were born were not nearly as strong in the dark side as the ancient ones were. The half-breeds usually outdid the natural Sith, the full Sith, in Force powers, and humans do worse than either in terms of dark side Force powers. So it really seems that your connection to one side or the other is the main limiting factor, because people that fully gave into the dark side, like Vitiate, had powers that are absolutely unimaginable by most. People that kind of became the dark side, like Nihilus, had powers that even Vitiate couldn't dream of. I mean, he could produce the same effects, but he had a much harder time getting there. Meanwhile, Nihilus just does it because he basically is a manifestation of the dark side. So it seems that your power level is really only limited by how far aligned you are with one side or of the other, and that kind of makes sense if you view the Force as an electrical field or something, and you are the conductor. The better you can channel the power, the more you basically can do with it. Now, the thing that we see with Vader and Anakin is that there's another factor at play, and that's your own discipline and mastery. Now, we know that Anakin had much more raw power than Vader, but Vader was actually the superior combatant because he knew how to properly channel these energies and not waste a lot of energy on the way. So it seems to me that being born with the Force is not necessarily a limitation, because if you are Force sensitive, if you're born in any level of Force sensitivity, you can actually get very, 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 very far. We have people in galactic history that were similar to Darth Bane, not even aware that they had any Force powers until about the mid section of their life, and he became one of the most powerful guys around. So that's a thing. And apparently we have people that are not born with the Force at all and can't use it at all, no matter how hard they try or study. So as long as you are born as Force sensitive, you can use the Force. Now there is a workaround here as well, because if you are exposed to very, very strong Force presences, like Kyle Katarn was on, I forget the name of the planet. If a non-Force sensitive is exposed to very strong Force influence, say on a light or dark side planet. Same with Darth Vectivus, I think, who found a Force nexus that made him Force sensitive. Like, he wasn't Force sensitive before, he became Force sensitive through exposure. So it seems that being born Force sensitive is not a requirement either, though it's the usual way things go. If you have Force sensitivity, there seem to be various levels, which many fans attribute to midichlorian count, but Luke and Leia had the same midichlorian count, yet Luke became one of the most powerful Force users ever, and Leia didn't even reach Padawan level with the Force. So it's not genetics, apparently. So what is it then? Now, aside from the alignment factor, it seems that it's basically just study and training, because if you study and train hard, you become much stronger in the Force. That's why, say, Padawans become much more powerful with their age and become Jedi Masters. Same with the Sith. You just grow more and more powerful over time, which doesn't mean that you are more and more and better aligned with either side. It's experience, it's training, it's discipline, it's just knowing how to use these energies more easily and access them more easily. So age, experience, training seems to be the most deciding factor, followed by I'd say the alignment that you have with either side, because you have very powerful Grey Force users that are not really aligned with either side, but due to discipline and very rigorous training, like most of the Knights of Sarkul, they become very powerful with both sides of the Force. Not true masters, to be fair, but they get further than most Jedi or Sith. So it seems to be about training and discipline first, and then it comes apparently down to how deeply you are connected to either side, because the ancient Sith were insanely powerful, and they drew the power, according to lore, almost exclusively through their very deep connection to the dark side of the Force. So that's apparently how Force levels work in canon, which means for any character, if you are not even Force sensitive, there is ways for you to become Force sensitive later on in life, and once you are Force sensitive, the amount of power you can get is not limited by birth, but it seems to be rather limited by how hard you study, how hard you train, and how much alignment with either side you have, which makes sense if the Force is a sort of energy pool conduit kind of thing. Now, with that said, I think I've gone on long enough. I wish you a wonderful day, and may the Force be with you.